Hey, welcome to another exciting edition of Blogging Heads, the third time Peter and I have tried to tape this particular episode. My name is Ezra Klein. I'm a staff writer at the legendary American Prospect magazine. And Peter, where are you?
I'm Peter Suderman, a writer at FreedomWorks and a blogger for the American Scene.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Good. Like I think most liberal journalists in this town, I am utterly exhausted by the primary. So tomorrow, for folks who don't know, is March 4th. Ohio and Texas are voting. We never thought this election, this primary, would go to Ohio and Texas, but it is. And it's a bit of a weird primary. It's increasingly feeling a bit like Kabuki theater because, you know, Mark Ambinder over at The Atlantic, who's done, I think, a real interesting thing by creating a reported political blog, which has frankly worked a lot better for understanding what's going on in this campaign than actually reading the A1 of the New York Times. He ran the numbers on the delegates for Clinton, and it is just about, even if she beats Obama, which is a favorable assumption, in Ohio and Texas, and then goes on to win just about all the remaining primaries, she will still end up 100 delegates below him, 100 delegates, and it just couldn't be harder to imagine at this point the superdelegates running a counter-majoritarian decision and overturning the apparent will of the plurality of the Democratic sort of primary and caucus electorate. But she's in there, and she's going to fight it out, and, I mean, there's sort of a weird question now as to whether or not she's playing to win, or playing to damage Obama, or playing to just staying in the game in the hopes that he makes a sort of career-ending mistake, screw-up, injury, gets on the stage with Louis Farrakhan. But it's all become very, very strange, particularly for those of us sitting within the left's tent, watching this battle go on. Today, the Clinton campaign sent out a memo on questions Obama should be asked about his associations with financier Tony Rezko, which is, just sort of teeing it up for, I think, John McCain and the general there. But what does it look like to you, Peter? What does it look like not inside the liberal tent over there?
Well, I think on the right there are probably two sort of divergent camps, and one of them has sort of a sympathy for Obama, and this is just sort of defined by he's a really nice guy, he's really appealing factor, and there's not a lot beyond that, and the other camp has sort of bought Hillary Clinton's line recently. This is a sort of a new camp that I've noticed, that they bought Hillary Clinton's line about Obama being all sort of cotton candy and all sort of rhetorical fluff and nothing else. I was talking to a conservative friend just yesterday evening. She noted that he just doesn't have any. He's just all talk. There's nothing else there. And so you've got sort of diverging sympathies, I think, on the right, are sort of that's where the two main camps are. I think the libertarian and the cosmopolitan part of the right tends to fall more on the pro-Obama side, just sort of finding him appealing. Mm-hmm. And the sort of the more red meat types are falling weirdly more on the Hillary Clinton side, sort of following in the ridiculous footsteps laid out by Ann Coulter, and going. Sure.
Just before you go off of it, just because I'm interested, I know the right would never play identity politics. But I was just curious, are there demographic differences between those two groups? Because I certainly noticed that sort of among my libertarian friends who like Obama, I mean, again, of course it's not identity politics, but what they like is that he's cerebral and highly educated. I mean, he's a lot like them, frankly, and like a lot of sort of us on Blogging Heads and so forth. And that, folks who tend to side with Clinton, not everywhere, but there tend to be certain demographic sympathies there. Are you noticing any of that on your end of things too? Is that beyond just the left here?
I would say within the sort of conservative professional circles, that's the case. Outside of it, I wouldn't be able to say. Mm-hmm. But within conservative professional circles and sort of the urban elites, however you want to classify them, the New York DC corridor of folks who sort of hang out and associate with them. So maybe not people who are working at think tanks or working in Republican politics, but hedge fund types who hang out with those people, who know those people socially. there's a bit of a demographic split, because those folks who sort of identify with again with the sort of old school Buckley wing of the party tend to be more sympathetic to Obama, as far as I can tell, while the folks who are sort of the more ardently pro-Bush side are weirdly slightly more pro-Hillary. Not that they're exactly pro-Hillary, but they seem sort of more annoyed by Obama, and they seem to have bought. They seem to really have bought the Hillary camp's line about him being all hot air.
That's interesting. It's an interesting line. It's an interesting split. One thing that you tend to see a bit of on the left, and it actually dissolved in the professional circles recently, but that policy types would be a bit more for Clinton, because she does actually appear to know policy better than Obama does, and that sort of more political types.
She's certainly better at memorizing the bullet points.
Yeah, very, very, very much at that. But, I think to some degree, just in general. Is that true there, too? I mean, are the Cato sort of policy wonks the ones who are feeling a little bit like, well, this guy really just giving a good speech, or is that, or do you not see that quite that divide?
I would say that on the right, I mean, again, it's probably not much of a difference, but if I had to say, I would put the policy types more in the Obama camp, because there's a lot of sort of fondness is maybe the best word for Austin Goolsbee.
Right. They do like
on the right, like people don't think he's a bad guy. Maybe don't agree with everything he has to say, but are like, well, Obama's got Austin Goolsbee, and so if he's running the policy end of things, I don't know, it couldn't be that bad.
Does this go beyond Megan McArdle, the Austin Goolsbee fascination?
Yes, I was with a group of all libertarian think tankers the other evening, and there were quite a few of them who were at least intrigued by the idea of Austin Goolsbee. They weren't necessarily like on board with the whole Austin Goolsbee is awesome thing, but they were like interested in the fact that he might not be like a raving communist socialist, which is sort of what they would generally impugn to any policy staffer working for a Democratic presidential candidate.
It is the weirdest thing. I mean, I feel like Austin Goolsbee's economic research, for those in the audience who don't know, Austin Goolsbee is Barack Obama's chief economic advisor, was largely on the insensitivity of the rich to tax rates. I mean, one of the real clear lessons of a lot of his work has been that no, raising taxes on the rich will not decrease their productivity, and which is why Obama has, I think, been more sort of comfortable with the idea of raising taxes, particularly when you do it in a targeted fashion. He gave I thought he was wrong to do this, actually. He gave an interview to the Politico and ABC News and a couple others, nationally televised, or at least televised here, around the time of the D.C. primary. And they said, the National Journal said you're the number one most liberal guy in the Senate, which is, of course, a load of things I can't say on blogging heads. And, are you going to raise all of our taxes, Mr. Senator Obama? And he said, well, I think you're asking the wrong question. The question for me is not whether or not you're a tax raiser or a tax cutter. It isn't about labels. It's about who you're raising taxes on. Are you raising it on the rich or on the... And actually, I thought he was wrong to say that. I thought that he should have said, the question is, what are you purchasing? Some things are a good investment, some things aren't. Not too many people complain about funding a military, but more do complain about sort of waste and fraud. But putting that aside, his sort of comfort was saying, listen, there are people who really need a tax cut, who need a tax break. They've got a very big tax cut plan in their economic agenda. And then on the other hand saying, but look, we really can raise taxes on the rich. It isn't something we should be afraid of. It isn't something we need to shy away from. And so he's, argued for putting the capital gains tax rate back, sort of back to where it was before Clinton's cut. And he's argued for raising the cap on payroll taxes for Social Security so the rich pay more and it's a bit less regressive. And it's interesting to me that that's a guy who's been sort of attracting some libertarian affection.
Well, there's certainly all sorts of reasons for libertarians to to be at least wary of a guy like Goolsbee and certainly of Obama. We talked about this last time we were on. But I think the perception is more that, first of all, Goolsbee comes from the University of Chicago, which is just sort of automatic thumbs up. Oh, I don't know anything else about anything, but hey, University of Chicago, Milton Friedman, something. That's sort of as far as the logic goes there. And then there's also, there's a perception, I think, that sort of falls in line with the Noam Schreiber piece that was in the most recent issue of the New Republic, which is that, maybe these guys, we don't agree with all of sort of their methodology and all of the conclusions of all their research, and we think they've made some mistakes, but they're at least sort of non-ideological, and they're not liberal partisans, and so they're less worrisome because they can be convinced by data. And so if you could just come up with the data that would show them, no, actually raising tax rates on the rich is a problem for whatever reason, you could actually convince them. Whereas I don't think there's that belief about the Hillary Clinton camp or most other Democratic politicians.
It's an interesting thing, an interesting effect of Obama is that people feel that he will listen to them. And I found Noam's piece very fascinating. I did a piece also.
Are you suggesting that he wouldn't?
That he would.
I feel like he'll definitely. No.
Huh?
No, I know.
Oh, yeah. I am sort of suggesting that he won't, actually. I did a piece on Obama's economic advisors. I spent a lot of time with Goolsbee, and I ended up coming away with the feeling that there was just enormous convergence. That you could look at the behavioralist thing, which is sort of where Noam went, or, the idea they listen to evidence, but if you actually looked at the product, not sitting down and talking to Austin, and he's a great guy to talk to and a real sharp mind, but so is Gene Sperling and a lot of these folks. And if you look at what they've brought out, it almost is like it's a generic Democratic presidential campaign. The opt-in for opt-out 401ks, which are being touted as a big Goolsbee innovation, were in Gene Sperling's book. The automatic enrollment in the IRS, Wes Clark had that in 2004. Denmark has done it. California had a pilot program on it. It's sort of a long time. And a good Democratic idea, and Austin Goolsbee has done really good work on it too. Edwards actually cited him in his adoption of the plan, and sort of on and on and on. There's a weird willingness to look at Obama and look at Clinton and notice that they're bringing out these same plans, and then say, yeah, but along the way, Obama's taken us more into account. There's no evidence of it really at the end of the day, but his rhetorical style, his willingness to generously summarize a conservative argument before sort of just coming to a liberal conclusion, the willingness to be open and listen, it does appear to have an effect, and I don't know if at the end of the day it will be powerful as an actual legislative or governance tool, but it does appear to be real. People really do feel it, and they feel that they will be given a fair hearing. It's an important thing, it seems to me.
I would agree with a lot of that, and what I think is sort of interesting coming out of that is the way that the Hillary camp, the Clinton's campaign, has sort of decided to take that willingness to listen and also combined with his lack of detail in comparison with hers as far as policy goes, and brand that as a lot of as hot air, as nothingness, right. as a lack of it's speeches not solutions is her line. She's got solutions, he's got speeches, and what has sort of struck me about her line there is how conservative it is, and how it's sort of a conservative talking point. And I don't know, I guess it started with her camp, and then sort of the conservatives picked it up. But I've seen this. As I've said, I've heard this from many conservatives. I've seen it repeated in places like, in the Corner, at National Review, sort of all around. This is sort of becoming the line against Obama. For one thing, I'm wondering when we're going to get the Paul Krugman column criticizing Clinton for using a conservative line of attack on him. But I guess it just sort of seems it seems somewhat desperate to me to be doing this. Yeah, it seems like and it seems like the problem that Clinton has run into right now is that she's been successful at convincing voters to a degree that she is the candidate who has more experience. The problem is that that hasn't mattered.
Right, they don't care.
And that, like, experience isn't what they want. Actually, I saw something written, wrote this down, in Rolling Stone. Tim Dickinson said something, what he said was, she's reduced to holding herself out as the inverse to the not ready, blank screen, fairy tale purveyor of false hope that is Barack Obama. But when change is what people want, you don't win by saying, everything that guy represents,
Right.
I'm not.
You know what? When people feel sort of so positively about Obama, you probably don't want to be the anti-Obama. It's a bit of a stretch. It's in a tough spot.
Right. Well, it's sort of, it shows how what sort of the flaw in Clinton's strategy here was that they planned very well to push this one message and didn't plan for the fact that it might not be the right message to push. You know, it's just like it's like when you're playing a video game and you get to the final level boss, and you can be a really awesome player. It doesn't matter if you don't have the right gun.
Right.
And she came with the wrong gun. She came prepared for the wrong game. And so even though she's a pretty good political player, I think in the end it looks like now she's not going to win. I think that's the better bet at this point.
It does look
March 3rd afternoon.
It does look like that. Let me ask you a different question then. Is it John McCain's fatal flaw the fact that he doesn't know anything about economics?
I'm not sure if that's his fatal flaw in the general, but that's certainly going to be a big problem with conservatives. I imagine you saw the Wall Street Journal piece on him, front page, this morning.
I did indeed. I enjoyed it immensely, Peter, I have to tell you.
Well, I bet you did. On the other hand, I'm thinking a lot of conservatives are not going to enjoy it all that much. He did actually, he did a good job, as good as you could expect from John McCain at CPAC. The speech he gave there was on
political action.
Right, at the Conservative Political Action Conference, the big conservative shindig in Washington, D.C., that goes down every year. It's this crazy sort of right-wing brouhaha. Anyway, he came and gave a speech, and this was right after Romney had announced that he was suspending his his campaign, and what this stuff he said there was relatively solid, again coming from John McCain and with John McCain's record. He was no new taxes, I'm going to be good on earmarks, and actually wrote some of this down, and let's see, and compared himself in a way that's going to be favorable to conservatives to Senator Obama and Clinton. And then he got this sort of a weird pat on the back from Robert Novak that evening. Novak went over all the things he thought were wrong with McCain and then said, but you know what? There's a huge difference between John McCain and Senator Clinton or Senator Obama, and that's why I think conservatives need to rally around McCain. But he comes out with this interview this morning in which he just hedges the whole thing, and the last third of it is on his cap and trade program. And what I'm wondering is, obviously cap and trade is not popular with economic conservatives. The few who do support strong government action against it are for a carbon tax. And I'm wondering when somebody is going to start, sort of keying into the fact that basically, as we both know, a cap and trade program is more or less a tax. It's a more complicated version of a carbon tax. There's not really any disagreement about this. And so, but he's running on a no new taxes platform, and yet also advocating a tax there, and I think that's going to present some pretty serious problems for him, certainly with the conservative base, but then even in the general, when he will be, this is going to open up charges that he's not the consistent guy that he's supposed to be. There was a piece, I believe it was in the New York Times, it may have been the Post this morning, about how John McCain is not always as consistent. Again, with the Bush tax cuts, he was against them. Now he is fighting for them, etc. And so his economic record is really going to it presents an awful lot of weak points for him.
Yeah, he's not very consistent at all. I mean, part of that, particularly on this is true in both foreign policy and economics. Foreign policy, he used to be a pretty cautious and for a period of time, prudent realist. He was against the American deployment in Lebanon under Reagan. He was against Clinton sending troops and then keeping troops in Haiti, and then he became a full-on neoconservative in the latter half of the 90s. But on fiscal matters, he doesn't care. As far as anybody can tell, he doesn't like earmarks.
No, he's straight up said to the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
I mean, he said, I don't know much about economics. And what I thought was really great was I saw at one point that he said, well, but I'm reading Alan Greenspan's book,
right? No,
in order to help out, as if Alan Greenspan's autobiography is as Mankiw's textbook.
But it's very strange because, I mean, look, you have this interview today, and you have this very, very funny back and forth with Rick Davis or Jim Davis or something like that. The guy who did the piece says, Senator, you've got these add-on Social Security accounts on your website. And he says, oh, no, I support what Bush put in 2005. And the guy says, no, but on your website it says blank. And McCain says, well, I'll change the website. And then there's this piece in
parentheses, it has not been changed.
On Sunday, the website remained unchanged. And I don't really understand what conservatives want out of him here. He can't have a consistent record because he doesn't have one. It isn't something that if he just made the right pander, he would. He has capitulated a ton of things he apparently believed in order to become president, which, fair enough, you can do that. And, folks either have to believe he's going to not screw them over or assume that he will. The big danger for conservatives, to me, it seems, is that McCain isn't going to be around very much longer. Not that he can't be, not that he can't live for another couple of decades, God willing, but
he's his mother is spry and lively.
Right, well, as we keep hearing. But the point about McCain is that his experience in 01 and 02 sort of points the way for him, if he were elected president, to being a national, a unifying, an almost historic figure. And will he really want to just continually, capitulate to these people he hates after they have elected him, or will he want to swing to the center, leave a bunch of conservative talking points and agenda items in the dust, and try to cobble together his next majority as a sort of a 62% from the center where everybody loves him because he's been governing in the 01-02 McCain-Lieberman model and not the sort of John McCain 2008 whatever you want me to say I'll say it model.
I think that's very astute. I think, sort of from my perspective as sort of libertarian economic conservative, my hope with a lot of the John McCain issues, aside from spending and earmarks, a lot of the issues that I care about is that McCain will simply not care about them and will leave them up to somebody else. He'll hire somebody to sort of manage that who will be acceptable, and he'll go off and he'll do his thing, because I feel like if he ever sort of decides that he's going to stick his paws into whatever economic matter, he's going to do something that conservatives won't like, because conservatives will push him to do one thing. He will not like being pushed by a base that he has, at best, a sort of love-hate relationship with. And then he'll decide. I mean, this is what John McCain does: is when people push him, he pushes back. Right. There's a great Matt Taibbi piece in the New Rolling Stone on McCain, which argues, the last third of the piece argues that that John McCain sees everything through the lens of war. And through the lens of battle, and that he's still sort of fighting Vietnam battles that he never got to finish, and that sort of and Yuval Levin has written about this as well, calling him sort of an honor conservative who's not really concerned.
Matt Iglesias, our fellow blogging head, has done a lot of work on this as well.
Right, and I think it's a very accurate picture of John McCain. And so, from a domestic economic policy perspective, that's not really the guy who you want messing around with those details and sort of deciding based on honor, how we arrange and how things are distributed and sort of what plans are going to. I mean, the analogy I always sort of think of with John McCain is that John McCain is like Worf from Star Trek: The Next Generation. And Worf is pretty awesome, and you want Worf standing there on the bridge and like wearing that thing, with his batleth and whatnot. You want him on your ground party when you go into whatever, and you want him to be there. You don't want you don't want Worf anyway in charge. And so you want him around, but I'm not sure he's always the best one to have making every little decision there. I get it. It's going to be a problem for conservatives. I'm hoping, though, and I think this is more possible than maybe even I, think from time to time, that there will be some sort of truce. That John McCain will look and there were maybe not even that it will start with John McCain, that it will start with the sort of the conservative pundit class and the conservative professionals, and they'll say, okay, well, we're going to be with John McCain, and because we're not going to go Obama or Clinton, that's just not going to happen, right? So let's see what we can do for McCain, and let's see what sort of how we can say, okay, we'll help you if you help us a little bit, and McCain will sort of look at that and say, okay. If you guys aren't going to push me, but if you guys are going to sort of offer to negotiate here and to sort of do the right thing by me, if conservatives decide instead of to sort of fight him, as a lot of them have done, certainly the Limbaughs and the Ann Coulters and such, it's not going to work. But if they sort of play off of his honorability, and sort of use that to as a bargaining chip, or sort of understand that when they're doing the bargaining dance between what are we going to get out of a John McCain candidacy here, and sort of what do we want from this. I think you could see less friction between the two sides.
You could see less friction. It's hard to imagine
than a lot of us might expect.
To offer him, because frankly, John McCain does not need to bargain with Robert Novak. These guys all opposed him for the presidency. They fought against him. He's a guy who remembers slights as far as anybody can tell. And at the end of the day, they're going to fall in line because they don't have a choice. And it isn't clear to me how they.
I don't know about that. I feel like it's going to make his job a lot harder if he doesn't have at least reasonably good relations with these people. It's going to make his job a lot harder. And go back and look at his CPAC speech, and I think he knows that.
Well, I think he knows that for now he's got to
let's at least make a truce.
I think for now he's got to give a couple
maybe that's the cynical way of looking at it. But
he wins, and it's not been on the backs of these people. It's not. I mean, he has won these primaries largely without Republican support. It's been independents who have pushed him over, while the Republican vote went for Romney or for Huckabee at times. And
that's true.
At the end of the day, I don't
think
he owes them as much as they wish he did. It isn't to say that at times McCain, for his own reasons, won't be a conservative, but I think in a way it's almost curiously symmetrical to Barack Obama. He can really go in the direction he wants to go. And if he chooses to go with them, so be it. But he doesn't need to make a deal. And that's the problem. They're going to want to make a deal, but at the end of the day, they don't have votes in Congress. They don't really have that much money for him. They don't have the supporters he needs. And he has an alternative path to political power, and he's seen it before. He's tasted that land when the whole media loves him and the country sees him as a national unifying figure. And it's really hard for me to believe that John McCain, if he ever does step foot into the Oval Office and sit down in that chair, won't say to himself, I want to be America's president, and will instead choose to sort of follow the 51% path of George W. Bush. But on that, I think we should go on to William F. Buckley.
Okay.
I just want to have a concluding
well, just one thing, sort of very quickly, I think there's a lot of truth to what you say, but I would also say that there's something to the fact that that John McCain does consider himself a conservative. Maybe not a conservative in the red state, red meat, Rush Limbaugh mold. Certainly not. But he considers himself a conservative, and he considers conservatives good people who are deserving of some measure of honor and respect, provided that they hold up their end of the honor and respect bargain. And I feel like if the two sides can sort of come, can meet at whatever line it is that divides them and shake hands and sort of agree, then I feel like even if he doesn't think he's going to get something from them, he thinks they deserve. He again, they're his people, even if not exactly. And so he's gonna reach out to them, and provided that they don't push and throw fits.
I certainly agree that he'll reach out. I just don't know if he'll give them a whole lot. But
and I think in a genuine way, not in a cynical or pandering way. I mean, there's always cynicism and pandering, but I think it'll be genuine to a large degree.
Well, I hope you're wrong, or at the very least, I hope we don't have to find out. But William F. Buckley. Do you have thoughts, a touching remembrance for us?
I mean, in a very generic sort of way, there's what can you say about William F. Buckley, except that everyone who works in the conservative movement owes him their job, and everyone, but I mean, there's there's that, and there's sort of that. There's his effect on the political sphere, but what's always interested me about Buckley is that he was certainly a man of politics. There's no question about that. But he was a lot more than that, and he was not a man of only politics. In fact, politics was not the first thing he was about. I mean, it always seemed to me that the first thing he was about was ideas, just sort of the intellectual stimulation provided by the exchange of ideas and sort of and the input of ideas, taking them in and sort of, let's see what we can do with this. He was, I mean, every time you saw him talk, every time you saw him write, no matter what it was about, no matter what how much he cared or didn't care, no matter who his opponent was, it was playful. He obviously enjoyed the interchange and exchange of thoughts of words, and so he was, and this is I think sort of something that a lot of punditry, especially on television, has come to miss, and we get very little bit of the sort of the modern generation of television hosts is or a part of the television hosts, I should say. They're about winning, and they're about the politics, and they're about the fight today.
They're about the show. I mean, that's part of the problem,
right? Or there's that.
They're not about winning the fight. They're just about having the fight because that's what that's what makes good TV, or in their conception of it. I've never been a huge fan of Buckley's prose style. I've always found it a little bit sort of airy and unreadable, but and that's not criticism of it. Many people love it. I just don't react well to it. But I've read John Judas's biography of him, and I loved it. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it to anyone out there. And he's just a very fascinating guy. And you're very right to situate him in this sort of playful politics. He was dear friends with John Kenneth Galbraith, who's a hero of mine, and treated. There's this great, you can find it on YouTube, a debate between him and Chomsky. And what else do you want to say about the debate? He treated Chomsky with a fair amount of respect. I mean, he was a respectful debater, and he did this sort of. He created an interesting space for dialogue, and to say that for him, right? And he created a sort of generation of intellectuals clustered around this one magazine, which I think to some degree has begun, is really lacking for his input. I mean, not to slam anyone too hard here. I don't think Buckley, after he turned, say, 23, would have written a book called Liberal Fascism. He seemed to get a bit beyond that, and I don't know. I think that it's a shame that. I'm fascinated by this moment when we have people like Buckley and Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer and Arthur Schlesinger and Galbraith and others who were sort of political performance artists in addition to being sort of men of ideas, and they were the ones who filled the bookshelf space now given over to Coulter and Moore and O'Reilly and people like that. And not that there's no worth maybe in what O'Reilly and Moore or whatever do, but I think that Galbraith and Buckley really
takes some talent to do that. Certainly,
books with ideas,
some skill.
And they were able to make those ideas funny and readable. And these folks just populate these books with punches. And I think we have lost something. I mean, Galbraith died a year ago. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. died this year. Gore Vidal is Norman Mailer died a couple weeks ago. Gore Vidal is the only one left, really. And it's going to be a shame when that generation passes into the mist, I think.
Yeah, I was watching. I forget. I don't even remember what network last night, and I almost couldn't pay attention to it because it was an amazing sort of blend of substance-free and too much going on all at the same time. There was far too much there and far too much nothing. And there was some panel of 5 or 6 people talking. I think, well, I don't remember what show it was, but and then you go back and you watch that Chomsky clip, and Buckley was able to sit there and talk for 20 minutes,
right.
about
It was like a blog.
This amazing sort of It was yes.
It's like the last place we can all do that, right? Where we can sit back and just like sort of hold forth at length, and then eventually like one of us will drop the other. But you can just talk until the idea is done, and maybe that's got its problems. Right. People get bored, but it's got its advantages. I think Buckley's legacy is in the blogosphere. I know the blogosphere gets an awful, terrible rap for being, sort of a bastion of vitriol, and for a while there were Washington Post stories about how every poster on the Daily Kos was, just angry and full of bile, and certainly there's some of that. No question, there's a lot of nastiness on the blogosphere, but at the same time, it's also sort of the place where people who just want to talk about ideas have gone. I think we've lost some of the appreciation for language that Buckley had, and that was more common back then. But sort of the exchange of ideas and information in a non-ugly fashion, in a respectful, civil fashion, really it lives on largely in the blogosphere, and I think that's sort of something that's an underlooked feature of it, is that it allows that sort of discussion to continue between people who are in many ways bitterly opposed in everything they believe, and yet sort of willing to, that's an interesting person who keeps my attention, is obviously intelligent, has good ideas, is an interesting writer on a consistent basis, and let's have dialogue. Right.
Or whatever.
The blogosphere and blogging heads. And then,
right. I mean, I would count blogging heads as part of the blogosphere, sort of an outgrowth. It's I wouldn't really separate the two.
And on that note, I think we should get to the real sort of story this week. And for those who haven't seen the week's wire, close your browser. Don't watch
you don't want to.
Go to your TV. Go find a friend's TV with on demand. Watch The Wire this week. It's a huge episode, and it's terrific. And
it's the penultimate episode of the series.
You tell me where to begin. Where do we begin?
Well, there are sort of two broad points. I mean, everything in the episode is there's a few things that are only very good, and everything else is amazing.
Right.
But I mean, I guess the things that have stuck out to me about this season are the first is that as The Wire goes away, as it sort of doffs its hat to everybody and says goodbye, what David Simon, the show's creator, has decided to do is to deflate the show's own mythos and its own mythology. And so he's taken the fact that he's built up these great mythological characters and this sort of and this these street icons. They're almost gods. I mean, Proposition Joe and Omar are they're in some ways realistic characters, although Omar certainly became less of there was less realism than usual. But they are also these just sort of towering figures. Mm-hmm. And then Omar gets shot in episode 8 by a little kid who just happens to stumble upon him while he's in a liquor store.
Right.
And Omar gets no coverage in the Baltimore Sun because Omar's not really that important in the grand scheme of things.
They killed Omar.
And Prop Joe gets it was completely unexpected and completely perfect. And Proposition Joe, Prop Joe, who was the great survivor. The man of amazing strategy and sort of the mind behind the co-op. He gets taken out by the young upstart Marlowe. I believe that was episode 4, and gets 2 paragraphs in the Baltimore Sun. And then there was this amazing scene last night. Again, if you haven't seen episode 9. Please don't listen any further. Everybody, all of Marlowe's crew gets arrested, or nearly all of Marlowe's crew gets arrested in a giant drug bust in this episode. And there's a scene towards the end of the episode in which Marlowe and his crew are sitting in the pen, and Marlowe finds out that Omar had been going around to on the corners and sort of calling Marlowe out, calling him a punk, I think was what he asked. Did you call me a punk? And Marlowe flips out. He becomes completely enraged. Right. Marlowe is like the coolest guy. I mean, and that's what makes him so scary. he got the fall.
Like a sociopath.
You know, it's like that's it. That's it.
Sociopath.
That's a death right there. Exactly. He's emotionless, cool. Just quiet the whole time, and he becomes completely enraged, and becomes in some ways scarier, and in some ways more ridiculous. And in some ways, and it's an incredibly revealing moment that this man who sort of had been built up to us, the audience, as well as to every character on the streets and most of the detectives in the police department too, as this sort of great mastermind, he's really this little petty, vindictive thug. And that's all he is.
There's a tendency in there. It was almost like Omar's final victory, though. I thought it was a bit of a quixotic mission Omar was on, where he kept trashing Marlowe's name in the streets, calling him all sorts of slurs, which I will not repeat here on Blogging Heads, and just generally smearing him as often as possible and as loudly as possible. Marlowe never heard, and when he did hear it, hurt him more than anything we've seen so far. Hurt him more than being arrested. He had more of a reaction to that than being told by Levy, by the lawyer, there'd be no bail for him. And he's in jail and can't do anything. But I will say that while the show has begun to take out some of its mythological characters, what it has also been doing is create more of a sort of grand cyclical mythology for itself. There was a heartbreaking scene last night. There are three I'd just go into here. There's a heartbreaking scene last night where suspicion begins to turn towards Michael in the Omar gang. Suspicion turns towards Michael. That maybe he ratted them out. Even though Chris and Marlowe don't really believe it, they don't want to take the chance. And so they tell
Michael's the only one who might have known. He shouldn't have known, but he's the only one who might have known, and he didn't get pinched.
And so they essentially dispatch Snoop. They tell Snoop that he's got to get got, as it's put in the wire.
Yes.
Couple things happen here. Michael figures out the plan. And he's in the car with Snoop going
by using the techniques that Snoop and Chris had taught him, which was amazing how that was set up so well. Again, watching. I mean, this is what The Wire does very well. But
he demands she pull over the car. He's got to pee, and then he does. He pulls a gun out of his waistband. She says, "How do you know?" And he said, "You taught me." And then she says, "You're always smart than us. You're never one of us." And she turns her head to the window before she's shot, and she says, in this really sort of heartbreaking moment, she says, "How did my hair look?" And he says, "It looked good, girl." Right. And he shoots her, and it's almost it's a really tender moment somehow. But then Michael obviously is now on the run. He's hot. He takes Bugs. He essentially hands Bugs off to an ant, and Bugs is little sort of strange.
An ant in the suburbs.
An ant in the suburbs who seems severe and doesn't even greet Michael. Doesn't say a word to him. And then comes Dookie. And Dookie had sort of been moving towards almost a type of redemption. But he had fallen in as he wasn't able to get a job with a guy who was a homeless guy who was collecting scrap metal like Bubbles used to do. And Dookie, with nowhere else to go, has Michael drop him off at the sort of the homeless camp where this guy is, where there are dogs barking and fires burning, and you see somebody shooting heroin. And this show suggests, or it seemed to me, that at the same time we've seen Bubbles sort of pulling out, Dookie's getting pulled in. He's becoming Bubbles. And I think, and one of my roommates is the one who pointed this out to me, but it seems a little bit like Michael, who's become a sort of renegade character, might be moving in a direction of becoming Omar. As the show kills off some of these individuals, it's replacing them. Because the streets, one way or another, go on.
Or does Michael become Marlowe?
I don't think Michael becomes Marlowe.
Probably not. But I mean, that was sort of what I thought at the end of last season.
That's why they couldn't trust him, right? Because he always asks, "Why do you kill that guy? Why? How do you know it's him? Does he deserve it?"
Right.
He'd almost become more Avon than Marlowe, but probably neither. But that's my hunch. But what do you think they're setting up for next week? I mean, it appears now at the end of it, you see Daniels and the lawyer whose name I can't remember, the prosecutor, go and they realize that all the evidence on Marlowe has been gathered illegally under the auspices of chasing a fake serial killer. Does what McNulty does this destroy the whole thing?
I wouldn't. I have no idea what's coming. I mean, in many ways, The Wire tends to resolve itself, sort of the major plot points usually in the second to last episode, and I think we saw a lot of that. And then sort of there's always a sort of a falling off, and sort of it resolves things and then allows them to break apart again in the last episode.
Right.
It sort of reminds us that nothing is really resolved or really solved. So whatever it is, it will be, as you suggest, something I think that says any resolution you thought you got from all these guys being arrested, from them finally getting into the Greeks with the stash, it's a Pyrrhic victory at best.
Right. The game goes on.
The game does go on. What sort of has struck me though, about sort of about the demythologizing of the show, and then a lot of other things, is that there's one of the great thing about it is that it undercuts itself at every opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's as if David Simon has taken a lot of flack for sort of being far too passionate about his own causes. He is a diehard democratic socialist of some sort. Mm-hmm. A man of your own heart, I would imagine.
More radical than I think.
Probably more radical than you, but I bet you two would have a lot to agree on policy-wise if you got to sit down and talk to each other. But at the same time, he is also a sort of a longtime steely-eyed reporter, and he has written in the many things that he's written about this season. He's sort of come out of his shell here and posted on blogs and sort of done a dozen interviews and written articles. But he's written that each season is freshly reported, so he's still acting as a reporter.
Right.
Even though he hasn't been in a newsroom for 10 years or whatever. And he's obviously a very good reporter. And what reporters, just straight news reporters, do is they just tell the truth without sort of a lot of ideological interference. And so you've got this amazing sort of contrast between his sort of deep, passionate, liberalism on one hand, and his sort of steely-eyed, sort of realistic reporting on the other. And I feel like the reporting has undercut a lot of his own sort of belief in the way, in that he's the kind of guy who really feels like that institutions are so what we need is dramatic reform of our political institutions and of city and societal institutions, and that's what's going to fix things. And then throughout, and then he's made this show that's basically about how reform of institutions is impossible.
Right.
And it doesn't work, And so that, I think, is sort of the key to the greatness of the series, sort of the thematic greatness anyway, is that he obviously cares so much about all these things, and he obviously is a real believer, and yet he's also this sort of gruntled newspaperman, realist, and so he's allowing, every time he does something, he makes sure to present the best possible case against it at the same time.
Yeah, Simon has
and
a
it creates this amazing tension in the show, and sort of in the ideas the show presents.
Simon has a tendency in interviews to say that, we need a whole new system. We need, he doesn't think that dignity for the individual is even possible in this sort of capitalist superstructure.
Right.
And
right.
It's interesting because what we seem to be moving towards is not just the lesson that the game goes on, but that it's all the same game, the same hustle. You're seeing Freeman begin to connect through the politician, through Clay Davis. He is connecting to the lawyers, politics to the lawyers to the drug dealers. The kids have connected the drug dealers to the schools. The cops are obviously connected to all of it, and particularly the politicians. On and on and on. And that you can't, if you read the Columbia Journalism Review piece on him and you see sort of the arguments he's placing in the newsroom here about Gus always wants to do more context, that, we can't just focus in on the schools, it isn't enough. We need to tell the whole story, while the Pulitzer Prize-chasing sort of craven, moronic editors are saying, no, we'll just look at one thing and really get into it, the homeless here, the schools there. And he doesn't believe you can reform one institution. You can't reform the game. You need to change the game. And that's why I say it's more liberal, but God knows I have no idea what a David Simon policy prescription for the future would look like. But
I don't think he would either. He would want to throw out the whole thing.
Right.
But that's sort of the argument I make in an upcoming piece in National Review is basically that even though he's this crazy liberal, he's made a very libertarian show, because the whole show is about how human institutions, by virtue of by virtue of human nature, don't work.
Right.
And so you sort of have to. There's no way. The sort of the signal tension in the show is the conflict between the individual and the collective.
Right.
That's going on throughout. At pretty much every scene, there's always individual desires versus the need to band together as a collective. You see it in the co-op. You see it in the police department. Everywhere. And so again, from my perspective, I think there's a lot to love, because this is a libertarian show made by a hardcore social democrat.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, the game may go on, but I think this episode of Blogging Heads must end. So, until
it's been very nice talking to you, sir.
Great to talk to you, Peter.
You too, Ezra.
Yeah, man. Keep off the streets. It's terrible out there.
You too. Get some rest.